Comprehensive manga+Game Life 0, Main World, plus Loli+Daily+DND Divine Character The World of Bone Kings / Buried Florian Good News. Reborn Bad News. It's Diesbord Good News. Becoming Lustful. Oh no, Mori Jingzhong. Bad News. It's a lowly male. This esteemed lady, could you please take your hand out of my clothes? Believe me. I'm really underage. Chapter 1. Divine Character. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The dawn breeze is accompanied by a faint fragrance. Gently pushing the purple-patterned wooden window. Under the golden morning light, the rudimentary residence was fully exposed. The simple wooden furniture is full of traces of time. On the dark red solid wood bed, a handsome young man with long ears was awakened by the chaotic sound outside the window. The young man flipped his body over irritably and buried his head in the blanket. He originally wanted to take another nap. With a loud knocking and the violent shaking of the wooden window. With a helpless expression, he propped up his body. The young man walked to the window with lifeless eyes and pushed open the wooden window. The golden glow of dawn, accompanied by a cool breeze, swirls with white petals and eagerly rushes in. The young man opened the petals that kissed his face and looked down. He lives in a wooden house built from the spreading branches of a giant tree that is over 10 meters tall and blooming with pure white stamens. A young girl who looked similar in age to him was displaying a stunning smile under a giant tree. The girl, like him, has long ears, a snow-white hair that is not stained with dust, exquisite and beautiful facial features, crimson glass-like pupils, and 4 brilliant diamond-shaped gemstones on her forehead. After seeing the boy appearing at the window, a glimmer of light flashed in her eyes, and her hands gathered around her mouth, shouting loudly. "Elvin! My slave! Get down quickly!" Young Ai sighed lightly upon hearing this. Lying lazily on the windowsill, with a caring and intellectually disabled gaze, he looked at the stunning young girl under the tree with high toes and a proud expression. It's been the 3rd day in this world. In my past life, I was an orphan on Blue Star because of my sensitive and autistic personality, and I had no friends. I didn't read any books and entered society early to explore and struggle. As for the reason for coming into this world, that was a peaceful and harmonious night. Following the recommendation of netizens, he found an anime worth criticizing. In the process of criticizing, perhaps it was because the plot was too critical, causing a moment of anger. My heart rate is too fast. I died suddenly. Good news, he has been reborn. Bad news, this is Diesbord. A world full of extraordinary powers called elf power, with many gods. 115 races throwing nuclear bombs at each other is a daily destructive attack. Occasionally, I can still see with my own eyes the world where the gods themselves come to fight each other. Good news, it has become a dominant race known as the Mori Jingzhong. The bad news is that men with low social status. And the reason for the low social status of Mori sperm male, it's not because of talent, combat ability, or intelligence. But rather because when facing women of the Mori sperm race, they are unable to effectively fulfill the most basic male responsibilities. Reproduction. As a result, she was brutally squeezed by women who could not be satisfied for a long time. The more pressing it is, the easier it is to encounter problems, and the more problems it encounters, the more likely it is to lead to pressing. Not only has their lifespan become only 1/3 of that of women. She has also been despised, dissatisfied, and resentful for a long time by the forest spirit women who hate her too much. Over the long term, irreconcilable and insurmountable contradictions have led to a very low social status. Iwan looked at the tree and let out a sigh as she looked at the stunning young girl in her past life who could amaze the world with just her appearance. I don't think it's true that it's not suitable for men with Mori sperm. But this color, oh no, it's a woman of Mori Jing kind. Born with fair and beautiful skin, with a childlike appearance and huge breasts. Born with an open personality and overly strong needs. To what extent is it thriving? The first full authority agent, highest decision maker, in the history of Mori Jingzhong, and the first nationwide ban after being elected. Just absolutely prohibited. Coercion. Threat. Forced. Temptation. Forest sperm-type women engage in male reproductive behavior. History says. Race First Continuation Act. Based on the actual situation, many supplementary regulations have also been introduced in the future. What is prohibited from molesting minors, trespassing into solitary male residences, and sharing males in public places if there is no reliance. Alvin is still full of despair about his future as an adult. Close the windowsill. Leave the girl under the tree alone and focus on the most important daily tasks. Alvin tapped the soul stone on his forehead, which was much larger than the regular Mori seed, with his finger. He appeared in a brilliant starry sky. Look around. The sky is round and the place is round. A semi-transparent crystal barrier filled with faint light. Cover the white jade ground with a radius of only a few hundred square meters. Beyond the crystal barrier, there is a vast expanse of gray. At the center of the entire white jade ground, there is a jade pool with a diameter of about 10 meters. A few golden water droplets scattered at the bottom of the pool like pearls. Alvin looked at the 3 golden water droplets and sighed. With a wave of his hand, a golden droplet appeared in his palm. After looking at it with some reluctance, I gritted my teeth and raised my hand. Water droplets flew onto the crystal barrier. As the golden water droplets blend in, the crystal barrier slowly permeates with a stronger fluorescence. Alvin sat cross-legged by the pool, pondering over the remaining 2 water droplets. A drop of divine power is naturally born in a single day. 3 days require a drop of divine power to maintain the divine kingdom. To save your life, you need to leave a drop of divine power as a backup. When crossing over, he extinguished his original body, replaced all existence, and recreated a divine body that matched his soul, using a drop of divine power. Currently available. 1 drop. Reigniting the divine fire requires 100 drops of divine power. Oh, if you don't do anything, it will take about 148 days to light the divine fire. And there are still 52 days until he reaches adulthood. After reaching adulthood, male Mori sperm must fulfill their reproductive obligations. Unless he directly defects to the forest spirit seed, he must comply with the instructions. After Alvin pondered, his identity after crossing over was that of the most ordinary citizen, only slightly higher than that of a slave. At that time, they will inevitably be arbitrarily designated as breeding objects. If you are unlucky and meet a cheerful person, ask your sisters to share. Alvin hesitated a bit, not quite sure. Can I survive in those juicers for 3 consecutive months? Iwan lay distressed on the white jade ground, thinking that it was really not possible, so he defected directly. Without igniting the divine fire, the true power of the divine character cannot be exerted. There is no longer any protection from the forest spirit race in this world of endless war. It's not a big deal to be chased by the goblins and dig the soul stone on the forehead. It's not a big deal to be attacked and killed by the orc species that hate the forest spirit. He died inexplicably in the aftermath of a battle between upper life races. The more you think, the more angry you become. With a wave of his hand, a sparkling crystal on both sides appeared in front of him. He fiddled with the crystal and muttered to himself, mocking himself. What's the use of your divine demeanor? Besides giving me an immortal lifespan, control authority over elf power, some inexplicable characteristics, produce 1 drop of divine power every day, nothing. Alvin tightly held the divine figure that accompanied him through the journey of heaven and earth. Lying on my back, I watched the chaotic starry sky shining endlessly outside the crystal barrier. After a while, he suddenly sat up. Continuing to murmur to himself. No, I must light the divine fire before reaching adulthood. Only in this way can we have enough self-protection power, so first of all, I need believers. Or people who have positive emotions towards me. They can provide me with all the foundation. The power of faith. Elvin scratched his head in some distress and confusion as he thought of this. How can I make others believe in me? Do I have any unique features? I'm not very lustful. After careful consideration, there are legends related to deities in previous lifetimes. Combining information from original memory. Elvin slowly sorted out a rough idea, then followed it to develop an executable plan with current resources, and finally roughly deduced the plan without major loopholes. Alvin put away the crystal and his mind moved. Return to the wooden house. Even if he pondered for a long time in the divine space of the divine kingdom. But in the main world, less than a second has passed. As long as he is willing to use divine power to regulate, no matter how long he spends in the divine kingdom, it is only a second in the outside world. Elvin lay lazily on the big bed. But thinking about the beautiful girl waiting for him below, my head hurts a bit. The girl's name is Nilian. Nierbalian. Mori Jingzhong is one of the 13 ruling families of the Nilian family, although it is a side branch among the side branches. But with the prestige and influence brought by the surname Nilian. In this town called Suehu Town, it has been rampant for a long time. And, this town itself is her adult fiefdom. On the day when he was just getting dressed, he wandered around the town full of curiosity. Coincidentally discovered by Nilian, who was patrolling the territory. At first it was because of the soul stone on his forehead, which was 10 times the size of a typical forest spirit. Caught Nilian's attention. But then, it was just a smiling glance at each other. She just wants to force him to take it home. Fortunately, just as Elvin was feeling a bit confused, he hesitated whether to use his divine power. Among the crowd of onlookers, some people knew his predecessor, limited by the protection clause for underage male Mori sperm. In public, Nilian could only give up. But his identity information was also quickly cleared up by Nilian. So she came to Elvin's house every day to declare sovereignty. Chapter 2. Nilian. Nierbalian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Elvin let out a light sigh, blaming himself. Although the divine fire has not yet been ignited, the divine kingdom has been elevated, achieving the status of a deity. But due to the fusion of deities, he already possesses certain characteristics of the deity. And what has caused him trouble now is one of the characteristics. Extraordinary charm. His existence possesses extraordinary attraction and seductive charm towards mortals. It will lead to an unwarranted liking and trust towards him by all things. Moreover, this influence still disregards race, gender, and the form of life existence. As long as there is a presence of thinking, it will be affected. This characteristic, combined with the strong interest of female Mori sperm towards men. It has been 3 days since we stored enough divine power droplets. He didn't even dare to go out. Elvin stood up with a helpless expression and pushed open the door of the rudimentary wooden house. Walking to the outer edge of the wooden house, Nilian looked impatiently at the waiting under the giant tree and picked up a new stone. Irving curled his lips and took a step out, revealing a seemingly substantial magic formation at his feet. He walked step by step, stepping on the formation, from the wooden house to the beautiful girl. Nilian looked at the lazy young man in front of her, whose eyes were a bit drowsy. Just simply looking at him, an indescribable palpitations surged in her heart. A hint of peach red appeared on her fair and smooth little face, and her radiant lips began to tremble involuntarily. Then Nilian's habitual little face tilted back and she reached out a hand to Elvin, arrogantly saying, "My slave. Please greet me soon." Upon hearing this, Elvin opened his mouth and looked at the pure and charming young girl in front of him. Wearing the usual attire of a forest spirit woman, 2 pieces of bright red fabric, neither as wide as a palm, crisscross and wrap around the slender waist, with 4 thin ropes firmly securing the fabric to an extremely large and plump fit. A pure blue thin gauze ribbon surrounds the plump and perky body, and the pure white plump figure becomes more prominent under the soft thin gauze. This is all the attire of a stunning young girl. Elvin listened to Nilian's words and saw 2 falling petals, which happened to fall on the pure white and smooth hair of the young girl. Raise your hand and gently flick away the girl's arm, in her slightly flustered little gaze. After gently removing the petals, he spoke calmly. First of all, I am not your slave, and then, good day, Nilian. As soon as he finished speaking, he sensed a milky white line rising from the girl's body and sinking into his eyebrows. Elvin raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but curl a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. The power of faith. This is really an unexpected surprise. The gaze towards the girl softened. Great, I think you have great potential to be my follower. Nilian looked at the young man in a panic, feeling his warm breath gently caressing her neck. His small hand tightly grasped the thin gauze ribbon around his waist, tilted his head away from looking at him, and his tone remained arrogant, but he responded with a trembling tone. Good day. Good day. Elvin looked at Nilian's trembling body, evasive eyes, and a bright peach red rose from her stunning cheeks. The bottomless and abundant abyss became turbulent with the trembling of its body. I couldn't help but chuckle lightly. Xiao Pucai is both delicious and playful. Looking at the girl who heard him laugh and turned her head to stare at him with some shyness and anger. Irving quickly diverted his attention and asked. So early, what's up? Upon hearing this, Nilian remembered the purpose of her trip, which was not only to declare sovereignty on a daily basis, but also to do something else. Immediately let out a coquettish snort, with a proud expression on her face. The little face lifted again and said arrogantly in a tone. The master has received notification. There are 2 spots in this town to send students to study at the White Tower Tree Academy this year. How about it? The White Tower Tree. Do you want to go? Just recognize me as the master. Irving looked at Nilian with some surprise upon hearing this. White Tower Tree. The top research institution of Mori Jingzhong. This little girl can get 2 spots at once. It's not easy. After Nilian finished speaking, she was about to appreciate Elvin's shocked and eager expression, but to her surprise, Elvin was only looking at her with strange eyes. With a pout, Nilian emphasized repeatedly. White Tower Tree. 2 spots. Elvin smiled at the words and looked at the girl looking at him with a hopeful expression on her face. She responded softly. Got it. The girl's crimson eyes widened wide upon hearing the words. Elvin's reaction was completely different from what she expected. Watching Elvin turn around and want to leave, Nilian quickly took a step forward, grabbed Elvin's clothes, and looked at Elvin's questioning eyes. I didn't know what to say for a moment, and my face turned red with anxiety. Elvin looked at the girl who was holding onto his clothes and her face turned red. She squinted her eyes and thought for a moment before asking softly. I'm planning to go shopping and buy something. Do you want to come with me? Watching a larger milky white energy rise from the girl than before, it didn't enter her eyebrows. Elvin's gaze at the girl softened even more. For the sake of the power of faith, let's not avoid her today. Upon hearing this, Nilian's expression calmed down and she responded without hesitation. Of course. The master is also going to patrol the territory. Riding in Nilian's carriage, heading towards the center of the town. As the noise outside the carriage grew louder, Elvin opened the car window and observed the scenery along the way. 80% of the pedestrians on the road are female members of the Mori race, while the remaining half are male members of other races. The maximum number of Mori male members is only 1/10. Elvin pursed his lips, further solidifying his decision to light the divine fire before reaching adulthood. Looking at this rare quantity, it's really not very safe to be a Mori sperm male quickly. Elvin discovered the key goals in his plan. Those orc slaves who were held by the Mori female race, either robust or bony in size. The robust orc breed is fine, and at first glance, it is clear that it has been newly captured. His expression was either displeased or resentful, and he looked quite energetic. And those bony, sunken orc species. His expression became very strange. There is a faint sense of anticipation in the empty and lifeless eyes. Even if the body finds it difficult to walk and is dragged forward. But there was always a hint of relief on the corner of my mouth. And those forest spirit women who lead bony beasts and humans. Looking at the robust orc species with a passionate gaze. Walking together, they all concentrate in one direction outside the town. Elvin squinted his eyes and pondered for a moment, then called the parking man, ready to get off the car and follow the forest spirits who were holding on to the bony beast race. For safety reasons, it's better to follow along all the way to determine the timing of executing the plan. Upon seeing this, Nilian quickly stood up and tugged at Elvin's sleeve, subconsciously pretending to be arrogant and asking. "Hello. Where are you going?" Irving frowned at the young girl upon hearing this. The tone of this command, the haughty demeanor. "I don't really think I'm her slave, do I?" Perhaps sensing Elvin's displeasure, Nilian lowered her head with some unease, but her hand tugging at Elvin's sleeve exerted even more force. Iwan frowned and looked at the little hand of the girl pulling her sleeve, exerting so much force that her fingers turned white. Looking up at the girl with her head down and an inexplicable expression. In a flat tone, he said. "Where am I going? I don't need to report to you, do I?" Upon hearing this, Nilian looked up at Irving with a cold expression in her eyes. Her anxious lips wriggled twice, but under Irving's indifferent gaze, she didn't say a word. Finally, Nilian bit her lips, lowered her head, and let everything start to become hazy and blurry. Chapter 3. The Foundation of Ascending the Gods. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Watching the girl with tears sliding down her fair and smooth cheeks like pearls. Elvin sat down again, looking helpless and frowning. Although the forest spirits have undergone thousands of years of social evolution, they have already formed a consensus. Even the values that even male forest sperm have accepted are male Mori sperm should try to follow the will of women and not easily disobey them. However, he would not agree with this view and follow Nilian's advice just because his current appearance is created according to the male nature of Mori Jing. But upon reflection, this foolish girl, under the consensus of this social atmosphere, neither intended to use her identity to oppress him nor continued to be tough. But instead timidly cried, "It's really silly and cute. So, it's worth trying to save it. It's a pity to let such a good believer grow crooked." Looking at Nilian still tugging at her sleeve. Wen's eyes were filled with a faint light, and he patted the position next to him. His tone was flat, but he said with an irresistible dignity. "Sit down." Nilian blinked her hazy eyes, bit her lips, and looked at Elvin with a solemn expression, carefully sitting next to him. Elvin turned over and, in the girl's stunned gaze, pinched her smooth cheeks and tugged left and right, saying, "What should be done for disobedient children in general?" Nilian endured the slight pain in her cheeks and instinctively responded upon hearing this. "Fight." After rubbing the girl's snow-white and soft hair with admiration, Elvin whispered. "Extend your hand." Nilian timidly watched as Elvin removed a small wooden board from the carriage, but under Elvin's solemn gaze and inexplicable dignity. Wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes, bit my lips, and with the final stubbornness, slowly extended a delicate little hand in the opposite direction. Elvin looked at the girl who reached out to him on the other side and smiled angrily. Amidst Nilian's exclamation, she flipped her tender little palm upwards and pulled a wooden board against the girl's palm. Pain. Accompanied by the girl's painful moans, she looked at her palms that were about to turn blood red, and the girl who lowered her head and began to sob uncontrollably. Elvin continued to ask softly. What should be done when dealing with meddling children? The girl who was sobbing this time didn't know where the courage came from. Upon hearing this, she looked up and tearfully retorted. I'm not meddling in my own business. Ah! The girl's words had just fallen, followed by a mournful cry of pain. Elvin put away the wooden board and mocked in a tone of praise. Sure, I appreciate your courage. Elvin comforted the girl by gently rubbing her snowy long hair and continued to ask softly. Do you know you're wrong? Nilian finally became clever once, sobbing and trembling in response, saying. I know. I know. Upon hearing this, Elvin gently grasped the girl's swollen little hand and gazed into her bright and hazy eyes. After gently wiping away the tears on her cheeks with her fingers, she whispered softly. I don't mind your arrogance, but I mind if you make trouble without reason. I don't mind your stubbornness, but I mind if you impose your ideas on me. Do you understand? Nilian bit her lips at the words and looked at Elvin, who was close but hazy. I don't know why, but I feel that he is so majestic and terrifying. Faced with his will, I can't lift any rebellious thoughts. Like the feeling of attending the forest god with family members for the only time. Nilian lowered her head and obediently let out a hum. Elvin looked at the girl's obedient appearance and nodded in satisfaction. First, eliminate her arrogance, and then slowly change everything else. Patted the girl and whispered. Go to the landfill. After wiping the corners of her eyes again upon hearing this, Nilian stumbled up and arranged for the entourage outside. Wait until the carriage adjusts its direction and starts driving again. Nilian slowly returned to Elvin's side, staring blankly at his contemplative gaze outside the car window. The cool breeze slid into the car window, gently caressing his hair. The golden glow of dawn was also quietly kissing his cold and stern face. In the golden and indifferent eyes, there is an indescribable faint tenderness. Trembling palpitations spread in the heart. Nilian looked at her and her eyes lit up, her body unconsciously pressing tightly against Elvin. The gentle breeze disturbed not only Elvin's hair, but also her heart. Elvin felt a soft and extremely soft body squeezing into his side, and turned his head to look at Nilian with an infatuated expression. After thinking for a moment, he reached out and embraced her in his arms. At the beginning, Nilian's body suddenly stiffened. Slowly, like a kitten, she buried her head and twisted slowly in Elvin's arms, adjusting until she felt comfortable. Elvin played with the pure white hair of the young girl, pondering for a while about his plans. After a while, the carriage stopped again. Accompanied by a pungent odor, it entered the carriage. Elvin knew where he had arrived. After dozing off in her arms and feeling a bit dazed, she gently placed the girl on the soft cushion, stopped her from getting up, and then left the carriage alone. At first glance, there was a barren brown land and a huge pit emitting a foul odor. Various carnivorous birds and beasts roamed and danced around the giant pit. Suppressing the pungent smell, he came to the giant pit and looked down. The huge pit, which is over 10 meters deep, is filled with various household waste and amputated limbs. Elvin lightly scanned the dead objects and gazed at the large, wriggling, living creatures. As Elvin raised his hand, the wriggling creature was enveloped by an invisible giant force and slowly rose from the huge pit. Elvin carefully placed the living creature not far away. I looked at the dozen or so half-dead orc species intertwined together. The golden radiance began to emerge in the eyes. Invisible pressure suddenly descended. Elvin reached out to the group of orc species and whispered. I grant you redemption. The golden vastness, emitting an unparalleled and majestic radiance, appeared above the group of figures. As the golden radiance fell, the intertwined silent orc races began to make various sounds of surprise or cheers. All their injuries were healed in the radiance. With the guidance of the radiance, they discovered Elvin with golden eyes beside them. Most orc species, under inexplicable guidance, began to devoutly kneel and worship Elvin, grateful of his redemption, grateful for his gifts. But a few exceptionally robust orc species refused inexplicable guidance in their hearts, only bowing their heads to signal to Elvin. To show gratitude. Elvin squinted his eyes and scanned a circle of orc species with vastly different appearances and fur colors, whispering. Are you willing to believe in me? Under the blessing of golden radiance, Ai Wenming's soft voice resounded like thunder in the ears and hearts of the orc races. Sacred and vast. solemn and kind. Most orc species kneel more devout and fanatical. Waves of milky white mixed with a hint of golden light rose from them and converged in Elvin's eyebrows. An inexplicable message appeared in Irving's heart. Believers. 9-inch. Although Elvin felt a little sorry for that drop of divine power, he was particularly satisfied as he gazed at the orc races with milky white belief lines extending from their bodies. The foundation of ascending to the gods is forged here. Chapter 4. Believers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Elvin had a soft expression and looked at the 3 standing orc races with a smile on his face. Being able to maintain one's beliefs and perseverance under the majestic radiance of divine power and the vastness of a prison. The resilience of their mind and the piety of their beliefs. He deserves to give it a sidelong glance. Elvin praised the 3 people and said, "Your beliefs and courage are truly remarkable. Curiously, why aren't you willing to believe in me?" The 3 orc races faced Elvin with a soft and comfortable expression, and after looking at each other, one of them said, "A great existence. We just want to go home and protect our tribe." Iwan heard the words clearly, with a simple and clear reason. But the simpler the reasons, the more undeniable the power they contain. Smiling and nodding, indicating recognition of their reasons. Irving's pale golden eyes swept over the 3 orc races again. Just like going back in time. The 3 orcs, in unbearable agony, screamed and regained their appearance when Elvin rescued them from the bottom of the pit. Elvin looked at the 3 orc species with only slight chest undulations, which could prove that they were still alive, and whispered. "I understand and respect your beliefs, so, please live well with your beliefs." After speaking, Elvin carefully lifted the 3 orc breeds and slowly placed them back in their previous positions at the bottom of the pit. The rest of the orc species knelt down, listening to the screams of the 3 and watching them return to the bottom of the pit, feeling as if they were alive again. My fear of Elvin grew stronger in my heart. At the same time, faith is also more devout. Elvin turned to look at the orc races kneeling on the ground and said to them with a soft expression, "Follow me." The orcs stood up immediately upon hearing the words and followed Elvin as he turned and left. Under an inexplicable warning in their hearts, they dared not even look straight at Elvin's back, only daring to watch his footsteps follow. Return to Nilian's carriage. Several forest spirit seed maids accompanying were curious and puzzled as they looked at the orc species that suddenly appeared behind Elvin. Under the shielding of Elvin's divine power, they knew nothing about everything that had just happened. Elvin stepped into the carriage and walked up to Nilian, who was lying on a soft cushion, half asleep and half awake. Pinch her smooth little face and wake her up. In Nilian's puzzled little gaze, Elvin asked softly, "Is there a place where orc species can stay safely for a long time?" Upon hearing this, Nilian blinked and thought for a while before responding somewhat uncertain. "A big farm." Elvin raised his eyebrows and rubbed Nilian's hair in appreciation. Indeed, placing orc breeds on farms is long-term and stable, driven by the need for production costs and stable productivity. The managers of the farm will not easily let the slaves on their farm die. Amidst Nilian's coquettishness, Elvin picked her up and opened the car window. Pointing at the somewhat anxious orc species, he said to Nilian in his arms, "These are my followers. Please arrange and ensure their safety." Nilian glanced casually at the orc species outside the car window and nodded obediently, Although I don't quite understand why Elvin cares about the life and death of just a few slaves. But as long as he is happy. It's just a farm, there are over a dozen under her name. After watching Nilian give a few instructions to the maids left with the orc breeds and a carriage loaded with food weapons. Irving nodded in satisfaction. As the carriage began to move again, on the way back, Evan saw another group of orc species being driven towards the landfill. Iwan let out a sigh of regret. There was no more divine power left. It is impossible to imprint the seeds of faith on their bodies and minds through divine power, so that they can become believers directly. It's not worth investing energy in saving. With that time and energy, why not? Elvin played with Nilian in his arms, watching her tightly biting her lips and her seductive pink face. It's better to connect key points and expand and enhance one's influence. Elvin lowered his head and held on to his cherry red lips. While thinking, should we establish a church or something in the town? After a long time, looking at Nilian with hazy eyes and fingers in her arms, Elvin hugged her tightly and asked softly. Why haven't you seen any temple-like buildings in the town? Nilian lay on Elvin's chest, suppressing the throbbing of her body and lightly biting Elvin's shoulder. She responded intermittently upon hearing the words, saying, "No, not qualified enough." 3. Towns with less than 10,000 people, it is not allowed to establish a temple. Upon hearing this, Elvin frowned and stopped moving, holding Nilian's hot little face and continuing to ask. No temple is allowed to be built. Nilian was held in Elvin's hands, her eyes fixed on him with fascination. After hearing this, she nodded and explained. Yes, the rules have been passed down for a long time. There are quite a few ancient rules about His Highness Mori. Also, what else? It is absolutely not allowed to establish beliefs in other deities or anything like that. Upon hearing this, Elvin squinted his eyes and frowned. Excuse me, I didn't pay attention to these details before. Just thinking about it, this is the sphere of influence of pure forest spirits. Different from the world of the past life. In the world of Diesbord, all existing races, except for the strange human species, are created by gods. For example, Mori Jingzhong in the entire world, if all existing races are ranked according to their elven adaptability. Mori Jingzhong ranks 8th in rank. It was created by the forest god Kanas and is a race with long ears and huge breasts. Open by nature. The most obvious feature is the natural growth of a precious magical medium called soul stone on the forehead. Elf power has extremely high adaptability, and due to the soul stone, it is often hunted and killed by another species called goblins. Born and surviving in the forest, their significance for protecting the forest is not very strong. On the contrary, they are more enthusiastic about the development and use of destructive techniques. Chapter 5. Planning. You are listening at novelful.audio. Irving leaned against the carriage with a helpless expression. From the perspective of long-term development prospects, Mori Jingzhong is not very suitable, or rather, among the existing races, those with deities sitting on them are not suitable for long-term development. Elvin lifted Nilian's soft, snow-white hair and played with it at his fingertips. While pondering based on the understanding of this world from a past life. This world is exactly the same as that described in a previous animation called Game Life 0. The beings known as divine beings, towering above all living beings, engage in a battle around the Star Cup under the banner of all living beings. Star Cup, the core of the world, the hub of control, and the ultimate uniqueness. Those who own the Star Cup. It is the only true God. Having the supreme power to control, change, and correct everything. Everything that changes the past, present, and future is only in his one thought. Legend has it that the entire world of Diesbord was only formed by the debris falling from the Star Cup. According to the rules of the world, I want the Star Cup to appear in the world. It is necessary to choose the strongest existence. And according to the information from previous anime, how to prove oneself to the world as the strongest. So destroy the world. As long as you can destroy the core, elf corridor, of this world. You are the strongest existence. Elvin thought of this and curled his lips, laughing sarcastically. Deeply skeptical of this information. How could it be so simple? There are multiple divine species in this world, if it's really that simple. With their abilities, they had already personally stepped down and penetrated the elf corridor. You can question their conduct. But you cannot question their destructive power. And the allure of the Supreme One God. If it were really that simple, then the Star Cup competition would have ended long ago. It has not been entangled for thousands of years, and even now, there is no hope of an end. Think of those divine beings. Elvin squinted his eyes and a slight smile hung from the corner of his mouth. Speaking of which, he is still a bit happy. Although they share the same divine name and status as him. However, the two are completely different entities. The gods of this world are unique beings born out of prayer, wishes, and the will of all living beings. Their essence is an existence called divine essence. They possess selves due to the sentient beings and are born into the world through the activation of the spiritual essence. They are the embodiment and humanization of the rules and concepts that make up and operate the world. The most crucial thing is their existence does not require the power of faith to sustain. And he needs it. Fundamentally, there is no fundamental survival competition between him and them. So, Elvin is still somewhat grateful. The future is promising. But Elvin couldn't help but sigh. Although they do not need the power of faith to maintain their own identity and greatness. But they won't give to others either. Or for example, Mori Jingzhong, the entire clan was created by the forest god Kanas. Although Kanas does not require the power of faith, he will not allow the forest spirits to believe in other beings. Just like your biological child, raised and raised. Would you allow him to call someone else's dad and then abandon you to care for them? Elvin continued to ponder with a gloomy gaze. The belief of Mori Jingzhong is not unattainable. It's just not possible at the moment. When the deity grows up and possesses more great power. In front of the forest god, press the heads of the forest spirits and make them change their faith, calling them fathers is fine. Now just develop it honestly and secretly. If caught, I will really be beaten to death. Don't underestimate the sensitivity of gods to faith. Elvin felt the carriage come to a stop. Looking out of the car, it turned out that before I knew it, I had arrived at Nilian's residence. A manor located in a group of red maple trees. Elvin lowered his head to look at the girl who was biting her lips, her eyes glistening, and I still pity her when I see her. Forget it. Everyone has come. After getting off the carriage and stepping on the blue slate road that runs through the estate, I followed the joyful Nilian and arrived at a magnificent building made of white boulders. Several forest spirit girls, dressed only in white transparent chiffon, were waiting in the hall when they saw the two of them enter. Holding a basin of thin gauze, he approached the two of them and gently wiped their entire bodies with the thin gauze silk. Irving calmly allowed his maid to do whatever she wanted. Wait until the maid stepped down. Nilian tightly embraced Evan's arm and asked softly. Should we have lunch first or? Elvin looked at Nilian, whose eyes were filled with a thirst for water, and pinched her perky nose, whispering. Eating, as Nilian, who looked somewhat disappointed, turned around and arranged. Elvin walked up to the decorative bookshelf in the hall and pulled out a book to read. He, whose predecessor was transported by a divine aura, shattered and occupied all existence. He despised the lack of fusion in his memory, and only watched it once. So, for a lot of common sense and knowledge, he now has a very incomplete understanding. As lunch was arranged, Nilian, who had put her arm back in his arms, arrived. While flipping through the books, Elvin casually asked. Let's talk about your current family situation. Nilian's eyes flickered with a hint of darkness upon hearing this, and she leaned her head against Elvin's arm before responding in a flat tone. There's nothing to talk about either. Since my father passed away and my mother remarried to the Temerier family, I was sent here. I've been living alone for so many years, and I haven't had much communication with my family for a long time. Chapter 6. Urban Analysis. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing this, Irving closed the book. Gently caressing the girl's slightly furrowed brow on her side. In the tender and eager gaze of the young girl, she held on to her soft and radiant lips. That's great. Having so many resources, but not many constraints from the family behind it. Irving satisfactorily released her tightly held arm around Nilian. Gently flicked her slightly swollen and watery lips with her fingers. Looking at the gorgeous and charming yet pure and tempting girl, I silently made a decision in my heart. Elvin's gaze was gentle, but his tone was solemn as he asked. Are you willing to believe in me? This life follows my will, and this life follows my path. Nilian stared foolishly at Elvin, whose eyes had turned golden. In the radiance of those dazzling golden eyes, she saw a piece of heaven. There is her beloved father there. Still loving her mother as she did when she was a child. There are many friends with gentle eyes. And there was Elvin sitting high above everything, divine and majestic, watching her with kindness and tenderness. Nilian extended her arm and tightly embraced Elvin, her eyes filled with endless fanaticism and piety, and her tone responded firmly. I am willing, my lord. Elvin gently rubbed the girl's snow-white hair. Once again satisfied, she lifted the girl's radiant lips. This time, the maid couldn't help but come forward to remind that lunch is ready. Elvin slowly put down the Nilian on his body. Holding Nilian as they stumbled, they walked towards the restaurant and sat at a delicate lace stone table covered with various dishes. The dining process is also very simple, just open your mouth and wait for Nilian's feeding. Since Nilian has also become his follower, he has imprinted her faith with his divine power. There are some things that don't need to be hidden from her. Elvin lifted the girl's body and ate the cherry blossom-colored fruit she handed over, while saying, those orc breeds today, give them certain rights, give them space to move around on the ground floor, spread my faith. Nilian bit her lips with a hazy gaze, hugged Elvin, and trembled as she responded. Okay. Okay, I will. Supervise them. Irving shook his head, picked up a piece of cake he liked, fed it to Nilian, and continued. No, the first priority is concealment, not to be publicly disseminated, not to be detected by others. Nilian didn't question her words at all and responded with a serious expression. Well, okay. Irving nodded Nilian's forehead with satisfaction, lifted her chin, and gestured for the girl to continue feeding. After a while, Elvin, who felt like he had eaten well, began to feed Nilian. While feeding, he inquired. How much control do you have over the town now? Nilian happily enjoyed the food that Elvin fed her, never realizing that even those daily meals could be so delicious. After intentionally holding Elvin's finger lightly for a while, he responded with a proud expression. Except for a few old guys, no one dares to disobey me. Elvin frowned at the words, old man. A forest spirit seed that can have a lifespan of thousands of years, called an old guy, may be truly old. Taking out her fingers, she wiped them down in the abyss of Nilian's abyss, and continued to speak amidst the girl's reluctant moans. Tell me more about those people. Nilian opened her mouth and waited until Elvin fed her again before she started counting with a satisfied expression on her fingers. The old guy from the Enlightenment Academy who pretends to be tender every day, hiding from that old fairy who can't find anyone every day. The person in charge of the slave hunting team. Upon hearing these words, Elvin began to ponder. The Enlightenment Academy has relevant memories in its memory. Speaking of pretending to be tender, he remembered a little girl named Loli who looked only 11 or 12 years old. It should be her. I was curious before why the only permanent clerk in the magic supplies store in the town would be a little Loli. Can't you find a human fairy seed? Fairy seed. Ranked 9th in the world. The innate ability is to build an independent space and small world independent of the world. They call it Luoyuan. Racial characteristics. Likes to peep. Likes to eat dog food. Alas, it is actually possible to supplement one's own special effect, soul magic, by observing the love of other races, and then use soul magic to build a Luoyuan. The more passionate the love plot, the more magic they can gain. But often, passionate and energetic love it is generally not very public. So, fairy seeds. becoming increasingly fond of secretly peeking into that hidden romance. Or the passionate movement of love, also known as the paparazzi duo, it shares the same hidden characteristics as another race. If they don't appear voluntarily, it's not easy to find them who have been hiding in the Luo garden outside the world for years. The leader of the last slave hunting team. It's quite interesting. Due to the physiological needs of Mori sperm women, they cannot be satisfied by Mori sperm men for a long time. And since the birth of the First Race Continuation Act, this situation is becoming increasingly serious. So the orc male slave trade has taken advantage. Started a prosperous period that has lasted for over 6,000 years to this day. Become the largest industry outside of the grain industry. I can only say forest elites have made indelible contributions to the harmonious development of the world's ecology. The orc race has a terrifying reproductive ability. But now they are curled up in the continent of Alila, afraid to cross the Lucian continent where the forest spirit species are located and expand their survival range to other regions. Apart from internal turmoil, the male population disappears year-round, and the new population is always insufficient. This is also a very important reason. Chapter 7. Measurement Units. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the meal was over, Nilian shyly helped Elvin, carefully licking off the remaining oil stains on the corners of her mouth. He hugged Elvin and arrived at a secluded place with a cool shade of trees. Playing coquettishly, Elvin half lay on the soft lounge chair and withdrew into his arms like a kitten. Irving doted on Nilian's little face. He embraced her soft and boneless body, swaying lazily and gently in the rocking chair, quietly organizing his thoughts. As someone who relies on the power of faith to achieve divine reverence, the two most important things for him are either graze believers on the ranch. Either it should be on the way to opening up new pastures. Providing a stable and safe living environment for the pasture, allowing the lambs to survive and reproduce, is his most basic responsibility. It is the fundamental responsibility of believers to respond to the power and soul of their faith. And this town was the first ranch he chose. Although due to the overall situation of Mori Jingzhong, it is not possible to publicly graze on a large scale. However, for a small number of lambs, it is still possible to graze here. So, based on the most basic responsibility, he needs to either limit or eliminate the unstable factors here. The three people mentioned by Nilian are currently the biggest unstable factors in the ranch and need to be dealt with as soon as possible. He didn't want his lamb, which he had worked hard to graze, to be taken away by an inexplicable beast without even shearing its wool a few times. Think about the intelligence about those three known individuals, and currently the best one to handle. On the contrary, he is the leader of the most powerful, numerous, and widely involved slave hunting team. The old guy who likes to pretend to be a lowly lacks intelligence and is not sure about his strength, but being able to live for a long time is enough to illustrate many problems. So we need to let it go first. If we make a direct move, there will be too many surprises. Is it a fairy seed? It's really difficult to find without actively coming out. I can only pinch the seemingly largest, soft persimmon. Elvin lowered his head and looked at Nilian in his arms. The little girl had fallen asleep at some point. Smiled and covered the girl's eyes with the palm of her hand. Let her sleep well for a while, don't worry, wait until tomorrow when the divine power droplets produce new ones. Just go ahead and handle it. Thinking of the drops of divine power, Elvin's consciousness moved. Consciousness appears in the kingdom of gods. Half-unreal Elvin looked up at the vast and brilliant starry sky outside the crystal-clear barrier. I am curious about the starry sky outside the crystal barrier, but if I want to explore, it is also something that I can only consider when I have the strength for a long time. Shake your head, turn around and walk towards the pool. A thin layer of milky white mixed with a hint of golden mist permeated the bottom of the pool. This thin cloud is his harvest today. Clouds and mist occupy approximately 1/20th of the space in the pond. Elvin looked around and calculated. Only by filling the pond with clouds and mist can a drop of divine power be produced. That is to say, 10 believers can only provide 1/10 of their divine power for a whole day to convert it. 100 believers produce 1 drop per day. Elvin has gained a more accurate understanding of the significance represented by the number of believers in his heart. Squat down and use your hands to flick the milky white clouds, then think about the enormous demand for divine power in the future. Ignite divine fire, upgrade divine character level, expand the divine kingdom, engraving divine art, blessing feedback to believers. Irving frowned and let out a deep sigh, marveling at the deities of the faith system. It's really exhausting. Shake your head and go straight back. Elvin gently hugged the girl in his arms and slowly closed his eyes. Flowers fall in the breeze, trees sprout and move lightly. Nilian shook her pure white eyelashes and slowly opened her eyes. I saw Elvin's gentle smile. After regaining her senses, she came to Nilian and with a coquettish moan, shyly burying her head in Elvin's arms. Elvin picked her up directly and let the girl wrap her arms around her neck, with her legs coiled around her waist. After patting her, she straightened up and said, "Hang up, don't come down. Take me to the bedroom." Nilian guided Elvin forward while tightly pressing her cheek against his shoulder. But as Elvin quickened her pace, Nilian gradually felt powerless all over, lightly biting Elvin's shoulder as if suffocating, breathing rapidly. She never felt that the road to the bedroom would be so far. I couldn't help but tremble, and in the end, I begged for mercy with a crying voice. "Please. Please." Irving's mouth curved slightly upon hearing this. Looking down at the girl's radiant eyes filled with pleading and pitiful expression, she curled her lips and wrapped her slender and soft waist. Holding the limp Nilian, following her guidance, unexpectedly arrived at a relatively small room. Apart from a beautiful and soft king bed, as well as a few wardrobes and dressing tables. There isn't much free space, the whole room looks very crowded. Irving nodded with her chin, burying her head in his arms to catch her breath, and asked softly, "Do you usually sleep here?" Upon hearing this, Nilian used all her strength to climb up and placed her chin behind Elvin's shoulder, responding, Yes, sleep. When sleeping, afraid of emptiness. Emptiness, no sense of security." Elvin nodded and gently rubbed the girl's hair. Sitting by the edge of the bed, holding Nellie, and tasting her lips for a long time, she finally released the pink girl. After lying down weakly holding Nilian, the highest point. After taking a glance at the wardrobe, he said, "Change clothes now, I'll choose your future dressing style for you." Unexpectedly, Nilian, who had been struggling for a long time before gaining the strength to get up, opened the wardrobe. Iwan was speechless. "It's almost the same style." Wave to the puzzled Nilian and pat the girl's head as she approaches. Speaking seriously to the obedient girl kneeling in front of her, "In the future, follow." Elvin paused for a moment, thought for a moment before continuing. "Do you know how to dress according to men's styles?" Upon hearing this, Nilian's face was full of doubts, but as she looked at Elvin's serious expression, she obediently responded. "Well, follow your will." Chapter 8. Preparation for Slave Hunting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next morning. Elvin, who was enjoying breakfast alone, finally saw Nilian, who had been dragging around for a long time before appearing in front of him. Wearing an urgently made pure white half-length dress, due to the short production time, only exquisite golden patterns were inlaid on the hem of the skirt. Elvin looked at the tight, knee-long dress. Nod in satisfaction. "Well, yes, although I also quite like the conventional clothing of Mori Jingzhong beauties. But one cannot dress like that." I saw Nilian's mouth pouting all the time again. Elvin furrowed his brows lightly, hugged Nilian's slender and soft waist, flicked his pursed lips, and said in a serious tone. "Everything about you belongs to me, only with my permission can I show it to others, do you know? Nilian was originally not used to this style of clothing, feeling too restrained and not free. But upon hearing Elvin's words and looking at his serious gaze, he nodded obediently with a flushed face. The feeling of being cared for and possessed. She likes it very much. Elvin looked at the obedient Nilian and asked as he fed her breakfast. Has the person collecting intelligence returned? Nilian eagerly looked at the food in Elvin's hand, watching Elvin refuse to feed without answering. After twisting her body in Elvin's arms, she finally responded. Well, I'm back, the report says. She has been preparing for the past few days. I haven't left the town yet. Upon hearing this, Elvin nodded and quietly fed the girl in his arms. After a while, when Nilian couldn't eat anymore, Elvin just touched her bulging belly and smiled, saying, Little fool. Nilian covered her mouth. If it weren't for the food reaching her throat, she wouldn't be able to eat it. As long as Elvin dared to feed, she would dare to eat it. Helpless, Elvin could only get up and pick up Nilian, who had gained several pounds, and walk onto the carriage. Looking at Nilian in her arms, feeling both uncomfortable and enjoying, Elvin pursed his lips and lowered his perception of her intelligence once again. As the carriage galloped, it arrived on the street. Elvin found many heavily armed Mori women on the streets. Those plump beauties, dressed in leather armor, have knives, swords, and staff on their backs, and carry ropes and many small objects on their waists. Everyone's expressions were flying, laughing happily. Elvin recalled the scene from his predecessor's memory. It seems that this situation occurs once a year. Irving couldn't find the reason or result in his memory, so he directly asked Nilian, who was half asleep and half awake on his shoulder. What's going on outside? Are there any conventional military operations? Nilian tried hard to open her eyes, took a glance, and then took the opportunity to catch up with Elvin's embrace. She lazily responded. The slave hunting team is about to depart. Private individuals can also participate, catching more, feeling uncomfortable, and using it uncomfortable. No need to waste, you can sell it directly to the slave hunting team on the spot. Many people still enjoy participating. Upon hearing this, Elvin raised his eyebrows and looked again at the excited forest spirit beauties. It seems that still underestimating their physiological needs, overestimating their moral bottom line. As the carriage passed through the wide street and arrived at a flat square, it slowly stopped. Nilian looked up and pouted, saying, Here we go. Trading market. Perhaps because it was still early, there were not many forest spirits in the spacious square, except for rows of iron cages wrapped in black cloth. As we have already agreed with Nilian in advance, we have developed a rough action plan. After getting off the carriage, Nilian tilted her small face and walked ahead with an arrogant and cold expression, followed closely by Elvin. Nilian enjoys a very high reputation in this small town. In no time, several figures walked out of the scattered tents in the square and welcomed them. The leading woman among them seems to be familiar with Nilian. Approaching Nilian, she was taken aback for a moment. She was surprised by the change in her attire, as she didn't look any more refined in her attire. Later, she was firmly attracted to Irving behind Nilian. So handsome, looking so comfortable, I really want him. But then he forcefully averted his gaze and dared not look any further. After all, there was a master. She knelt down on one knee and lightly kissed Nilian's outstretched little hand. Standing up eagerly, he said, Long time no see, my beloved lord. But Nilian didn't even look at her. After looking at the people behind her, she replied calmly, Greya, if you really respect me, just pay the taxes that have been concealed or overlooked in recent years. Greya's expression was somewhat awkward upon hearing this, but she still respectfully explained. Dear Lord, as you know, we are just a branch of the Chamber of Commerce. All tax reports are handled by the headquarters. After years of accounting by the headquarters, we found that our costs were too high and we have been in a loss-making state overall. So. Nilian remained silent upon hearing this and looked at her with disdainful eyes. Or perhaps knowing that her words were too obvious and vulgar, Greya kept her head down as she finished speaking, until Nilian snorted coldly. She looked up and smiled obsequiously. After staring coldly at Greya for a long time, Nilian spoke sarcastically again. Annual losses. You have been losing money every year, yet you still have money to poach the only 5 warlocks in my guard. I heard that you are still offering 3 times the salary. I also heard that you have announced that no matter how much salary I offer, you will triple it. Greya's expression became even more awkward upon hearing this, and she felt that something was wrong. Although everything Nilian said was true, these 2 things were indeed done a little too far by them. But that's not the key. What made her feel a bit uneasy was that these 2 things had happened for a while now, and the lord who had previously been indifferent suddenly came to make a fuss today after making a few subtle gestures behind her. She lowered her head and responded to Nilian, saying, Lord. This matter. What a misunderstanding. When I met her, I didn't even know she was your person. Just because she has extremely strong sealing skills, which is what we urgently need. That's why. Nilian sneered coldly upon hearing the words, her bright and charming face full of heart-wrenching coldness. Lazy to pay attention to Greya anymore, Nilian crossed over her and walked towards the largest tent in the square. Watching Nilian enter the big account with Evan, Grilla whispered a few words to one of the accompanying personnel before following in. Chapter 9. Humiliation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Evan followed Nilian into the big tent. Nilian glanced casually and sat directly in the central seat. Elvin sat behind Nilian as he pleased. Looking at the young girl with an arrogant and cool expression and a noble and graceful demeanor, she sat with indifferent eyes. Elvin's mouth curved slightly. The first time I saw this girl's truly noble side. It feels quite flavorful. As Greya approached, Nilian's eyes became even more indifferent, and she said in a tone that didn't fluctuate at all. This year, I don't want your business association to continue losing money. Greya lowered her head and respectfully responded, saying, Of course, my lord. We will definitely work harder this year. Nilian smiled silently upon hearing the words, glanced at the standing Grilla, and calmly continued, saying, No, what this lord means is that all the slaves you have captured this year, I bought them directly at the market price. I promise not to let you continue to suffer losses. Upon hearing this, Greer's pupils suddenly shrank and she looked up in shock, staring at Nilian with a calm expression. Chaotic thoughts filled her heart. How dare she? She doesn't know the interests behind this. Why did she suddenly dare to be so unreasonable and tough? Greer hesitated for a long time, gritted her teeth, and lowered her head again in response, saying, Sorry, Lord. This is far beyond my authority. Please forgive any difficulties in following orders. Nilian's expression did not change at all due to Greya's refusal, but she continued to speak calmly. Then let that old man talk to you. Upon hearing this, Greya suddenly looked up again and gritted her teeth, responding inexplicably as she looked at Nilian who had not looked back. Yes, Lord. Your Excellency. Watching Greya leave, Elvin smiled and looked at Nilian sitting in front. Good momentum and cool charm. Take advantage of the absence of anyone in the account. Elvin pressed Nilian's body from behind. Amidst Nilian's puzzled and coquettish moans, she lifted her smooth chin and held on to her radiant lips. After a while, Nilian finally let go of her messy clothes and flushed complexion. Elvin gently helped Nilian tidy up her messy dress amidst her continuous moans. Looking at the moment, Nilian regained her noble and cool temperament, with an arrogant and indifferent demeanor. If it weren't for noticing someone approaching, Elvin couldn't help but pick up those sparkling and tempting lips again. Greya lowered her head and respectfully led 2 forest spirit women into the room. An old man and a mature beauty. Iwan glanced at the old man and dared not look again. Spicy eyes. Thick makeup and bright makeup, fabric that wraps around the chest, draped down to the waist. Elvin felt his eyes contaminated and quickly covered them and rubbed them. As soon as the old man and the beautiful woman entered, they respectfully bowed to Nilian with a cold and beautiful expression, and involuntarily stared at Elvin for a while. Finally, in Nilian's cold snort, she reluctantly withdrew her gaze. The old man looked at Nilian, his heavily makeup-covered face showing no signs of expression, as if he was smiling and saying to Nilian, "Nilian, long time no see." After squinting her eyes and remaining silent for a moment, Nilian suddenly smiled and said, "It's been a long time since I last saw you, Sylvester." Auntie. Elvin lowered his head slightly, behind Nilian, and raised his eyebrows upon hearing the words. "Do you call me auntie? That is to say, this person with spicy eyes is also from the 13 major families." The old man nodded lightly and sat not far from Nilian's side. Looking at Nilian with a cold and indifferent expression, she asked in a gentle tone, "I heard that Nilian, you have been wronged by me." Nilian looked coldly at the smiling old man for a while upon hearing the words. Suddenly, with no warning, he smiled again and responded calmly, saying, "In that case, I was just fulfilling my lord's duties. I can't say anything about being wronged or not being wronged." The old man smiled and nodded, clapped his palms, and said casually with a relaxed expression, that's good, since it's a misunderstanding, let's just forget about today's matter. My body is not strong enough. I have been dealing with too many things lately and can't pull myself away. Wait until the slave hunt is over. The old man will bring a heavy gift and personally come to apologize to you. Do you think it's okay?" Nilian leisurely rolled up a strand of white hair hanging from her shoulders, letting it wrap around her fingertips. As if not hearing the old man's words, there was no response at all. The old man fell silent with lowered eyes upon seeing the situation. In the big tent, it instantly became silent. After a while, the beautiful woman who followed the old man in was signaled by Grea's gaze. "Get up and pick up a glass of wine, kneel on one knee in front of Nilian, gaze at her, and say with a complex expression, 'I haven't had the chance to say goodbye to you officially, Lord.'" From seeing the beautiful woman following the old man in, Nilian's expression began to become somewhat complicated. Seeing the moment the beautiful woman stood up, her palm involuntarily tightened its grip on her dress. When the beautiful woman knelt down in front of her and heard her words, she clenched her lips and her sparkling eyes began to be filled with mist. Nilian suppressed the grievances, anger, and disappointment that gushed out of her heart, and her voice trembled slightly as she said, "No need any more." The beautiful woman sighed when she saw that Nilian hadn't taken the glass for a long time. She slowly placed the glass in front of Nilian and said in an inexplicable tone, "Watching you grow up from a young age, you are now a lord. I can't be any more stubborn." Upon hearing this, Nilian clenched her lips tightly, unable to resist any longer. She turned her head fiercely, throwing a few drops of crystal clear light and no longer looking at the beautiful woman. Just as everyone fell into inexplicable silence again, a majestic and grand voice resounded among the hearts of the people. "Betrayers, for any reason, it's not worth forgiving or forgiving. Not worth it. Nostalgic for its past." Chapter 10. Agreements. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Irving sighed and embraced the trembling Nilian from behind. "This girl, this lord is in charge. It seems like I've been bullied a lot before." Glancing around the crowd whose faces suddenly changed upon hearing the words. Elvin's gaze was fixed on the plump and beautiful woman, and he whispered, "Betrayers shall be punished with thousands of cuts and cuts." As his words fell, thousands of delicate golden rays appeared around the beautiful woman. The beautiful woman's face instantly became solemn, and she smashed the crystal bracelet on her wrist onto the table. As surging elf power gushed out from the shattered crystal, 5 complex and precise techniques and arrays instantly enveloped her. The old man next to him suddenly brightened his previously cloudy eyes when the golden light appeared. With the surging power of the elves, lift the cane in your hand. 5 equally precise 6-pointed star magic arrays envelop the beautiful woman. Elven didn't care about their actions, just gently straightened the girl's body in his arms and buried her little head in his arms. Later, he looked up at the 3 people across from him and calmly said, "Are you ready to go to jail?" Not waiting for their response, Elven reached out and shook in the void. The thousands of golden lines instantly pierced through the 10-fold magic defense array. In the pitiful screams of the beautiful woman, she was crushed into a golden hedgehog. Irving looked contemptuously at the heart-wrenching screams of the golden hedgehog. Unexpectedly deluded to use elf power to resist divine power. Any existence without a regular force. In front of divine power, there are things that break at a touch. Holding on to her arms, she heard a mournful scream and wanted to turn around to see what had happened to Nilian. Irving coldly glanced at the old man with stiff expressions and movements. "Extend your hand again and open your palm." Thousands of golden threads flew out of the beautiful woman's body at lightning speed, bringing up a blood-red mist. Watching the blood man lying on the ground, convulsing and struggling, Elven shook his palm again. As the blood man screamed more mournfully and hoarsely, the golden hedgehog reappeared in front of everyone. Irving gently patted the girl in her arms, who was shaking even more violently. Turning his head to one side, he looked at the old man and said in a gentle tone, "I'll give you a chance." Reorganize language. The old man felt the immense and fierce pressure emanating from the golden thread as it moved. Watching the terrifying power of destroying the 10-fold magic array as if it were nothing. Taking a cold breath backwards, my whole body trembled with fear. Unable to resist. Unbeatable. I quickly speculated and guessed about Elven's true identity in my heart. Absolutely one of the most powerful beings. Elf species. Dragon spirit seed. Or fantasy type. Upon hearing Elven's words, he immediately stood up and knelt down on the ground, respectfully responding. "Everything follows your will. A great existence. Please forgive us for our unintentional offense." Elven looked at the old woman kneeling on the ground with even more glaring eyes and looked away with disdain. Upon hearing the old woman's words, she sneered and calmly corrected herself. "Not following me, it's Nilian." The old woman immediately corrected her words. "Yes. A great existence. Everything follows the will of Lord Nilian." Elven nodded calmly, feeling a bit uninteresting. Just 2 quintuple magicians. In the forest spirit race, it is indeed a remarkable existence. In his eyes, it was just something that could be easily choked to death. Even the pseudo-divine power, condensed by the power of faith, cannot be resisted. Let him lose any interest in fighting. Unfortunately, the first battle. I was originally quite looking forward to it. Elven picked up Nilian, too lazy to pay any further attention to them, and walked in the void, avoiding the blood pool on the ground and stepping out of the tent. "Return to the carriage and give a command to return." The girl lifted her arms silently, her eyes swollen with tears. Gently wiped the tears off Nilian's cheeks. "This girl cries every day, she's really a little crying bag." Looking at Nilian, who had finally calmed down slowly. Elven gently embraced her soft and fragrant body again in his arms and whispered. "Tell me about your relationship with that 5 warlock." Nilian pressed her little head against Elven's chest and responded slowly in a low tone. "She is my mother's maid. He was the only person who chose to come here with me back then." Upon hearing this, Elven realized that he had been betrayed by the closest person. Lift the girl's head, gaze at her complex expression in the eyes, and softly say, "For your sake, I didn't kill her." Looking at the surprised expression on the girl's face, Elven frowned and added, "Just this once, my forgiveness for the betrayer. Who exactly are the indigenous people?" He only knew the cruelty, coldness, and absurdity of this world through simple information from previous anime. Life is like weeds, being harvested one by one without any reason. Various tribes are like chess pieces, fighting and destroying each other for a vague reason over hundreds or thousands of years. Is the slaughter of superior races against subordinate races more like a daily leisure activity after meals, a reason for slaughter? Just because you don't like it is enough. This fool has lived in this world for so long. How could you still be so innocent and kind in dealing with people hating the iron for not turning into steel? He broke off the girl's body and gave her a hard slap. After listening to her mournful cries, let out a cold snort. Only then did he embrace her again. Looking down at the timid little gaze that the girl secretly glanced at him. After another cold snort of helplessness, he finally spoke up. After returning, prepare and gather some manpower as soon as possible. We're also going to catch slaves.